Welcome everyone, I'm Heather Arnold, Local History Librarian here at Cranbourne Libraries. Not most people know me. So today we're going to talk about the history of Cranbourne. So I'm going to use this book a lot. Now can you see this? The Good Country Cranbourne Shire by Noel Gunston. It's a great book, published in 1968, and I get a lot of my information from him. He's still alive, Noel Gunston. He sent me an email a few years ago, about a year ago, because I wrote something about someone, and I was so thrilled. I just thought it was just like, like an email from a pop star that you had a crush with. I was just so excited that he emailed me, because I'd written about Sarah Fagan, who is his great grandmother, who owned a little hotel, or a shanty, he called it, in Lyndhurst, and he wrote back saying that he thought that I had glorified her, because really she was a shanty owner. I'd called her a hotel keeper, but anyway, it was such a thrill to get an email from him. But he lives in Canberra and he's still studying and working, so it's really nice. He's in his 80s. So we'll go now. I'm going to share my screen, and so it'll be a PowerPoint presentation. I'll talk to all the slides. I'll share. Right, so can you see history of Cranbourne?
Yes.
Yep. Yes?
Yep. Yes.
Yep, that's good. So this is like the history of the a look at the European history of Cranbourne. Cranbourne, of course, is part of the Bunurong people's land, but my area of expertise is really the European history, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So just trying to change the page. Oh, there we are. So the first European settlers in the area were the Ruffy brothers, and they were Thomas, William, Henry, Frederick and Arthur, and they had the Jamaica run. We'll have a look at the next screen here. There. So this is the Jamaica run here, and it was a squatting run of about 32,000 acres, 13,000 hectares, and they took this run up in 1836. And in the 1840s, they also acquired the Mayoon run, which is this one here, and this was another run of about 32,000 acres, quite a lot of land, obviously. And they held this land together till about 1850. I get my 19s and 18s, till about 1850. The Ruffy brothers had actually come from England. The family had moved to Tasmania, and his father had been a journalist in England, and he owned the Farmers Journal, and then they moved to Tasmania, and then 5 of the sons all moved over to Western Port area and took up land there. And after they were Cranbourne till about 1850, and then they moved to the Euroa area. So that if you know the town of Ruffy, somewhere near Euroa, that was named after Frederick Ruffy and the Ruffy brothers. So they'd moved from Cranbourne to there. We know a bit about, there's actually another map here, which was, which was done in 1840 by William Thomas, who was the Aboriginal protector, and he did this map of squatting runs, and you can just see here, that's the Ruffy brothers' premises here at in Western Port. That's Jamison. I talked about him last week, Jamison and Rawson, who had the Yallock run. So that's one of the very early maps of the area, this one here. We know a bit about how the Ruffy brothers lived, because in 1845, George Henry Hayden spent New Year's Day in 1845 with the Ruffy brothers at Mayoon, and he did a number of sketches, and this is apparently the Ruffy brothers' hut, which you can see is not particularly extravagant, and that is supposed to be Frederick Ruffy, this man here. So that's what it looked like. Hayden himself, he'd written a book called The Australian Immigrant, a rambling story containing as much fact as fiction, which I was just thinking some people might say it's just like most stories, but not quite like that. But Hayden was an interesting man. He spent some time, 6 months on French Island in the 1840s, chopping mangroves and reducing them for ash to use in salt making. So that was an interesting story as well, but we won't go there. So the Ruffys were, as I said, the first European settlers in the area. in the 1830s. So by the 1850s, 1852, the township of Cranbourne was surveyed by H.B. Foote, and actually, before I go there, the township was surveyed, and the land sales took place in the 1850s. But the actual name of Cranbourne came from, there's two suggestions of where the name came from. So the Ruffy brothers had the Cranbourne Inn when they were at Cranbourne, operated an inn called Cranbourne Inn after the name of a town in Berkshire in England. But Noel Gunston, who I talked about before, he suggests that Cranbourne was named for Viscount Cranbourne, the brother of the British Prime Minister. Viscount Cranbourne was born in 1821 and developed blindness as a small child. He died in 1865, and thus his brother succeeded to the title and became the Marquess of Salisbury. And there was the Marquess of Salisbury who became the British Prime Minister on 3 occasions. So it may have been named after Viscount Cranbourne. There is a likelihood of that because towns like Hastings, Somerville, Pakenham, Lyndhurst were all named after members of the English aristocracy. So it is quite likely it was probably named for Viscount Cranbourne. Cranbourne itself means a stream frequented by cranes or herons. That's really like quite a sweet little name. So the original subdivision took place, this is the original subdivision plan from the 1850s. And if we just go to this map, the next map here, let's submit this. You can see the original township allotments were here. The Cranbourne Library is just about out here. You can see, we can't see of course, but it's out here now. So, and that is the racecourse here. That's Sladen Street and High Street. So that's the original township allotments. And one of the early settlers and one of the early landowners was Alexander Cameron, who took up the Mayoon Run in 1851. The Mayoon Run is basically like the township of Cranbourne is in the Mayoon Run, and where the Cranbourne Library is, it's also part of that run now as well. So he took up this run. It had thousands of acres, but in the land sales by 1856, he purchased a preemptive right, which is on the corner of Sladen Street and Cameron Street. So Cameron Street in part of Narry Cranbourne Road. So this area here, so essentially, no, this area here actually, down here. So where there's a retirement village there now. So the land sort of, he had that land here and he called it Mayfield. And he was, Noel Gunston considers him the father of modern Cranbourne. Like most Scots settlers, he valued the services of industrious tenantry and gathered a community about him which formed the nucleus of the future town. And one of his industrious tenants was James Mackey, who was said to be responsible for the name of Clyde. If you don't know me, I love place names. I love the origins of place names. So Clyde, Gunston says that the watercourse between the boundaries of the Mayoon Run and the Gam Run was named Clyde, and as Mackay had cut the name on a tree whilst watering sheep. So he'd obviously gone back to Clyde in Scotland, where he'd come from, and decided this creek should be named Clyde, clearly probably different from the Clyde River in Scotland. And then, so the creek had the name of Clyde, and that gave the name to the township as well. Alexander Cameron was a trustee of the Presbyterian Church and on the council, on the road board. And, you know, he was quite an influential man in the development of Cranbourne. Now, but perhaps the thing that actually really put Cranbourne on the maps was the discovery of meteorites in Cranbourne. So this photo here was taken in 1863 by Richard Daintree, 1853, sorry, by Richard Daintree, and it was, 63, doesn't matter. And they discovered, I'll show you this next map. So they were all discovered in a line here, as you can see. So they called them the Cranbourne Meteorites, but of course none of them were actually found in Cranbourne, but that doesn't matter. They probably should have been called the Devon Meadows Meteorites. But you can see where they were found, number 1, number 2, and they, let me go to my page. It wasn't, they were first found in 1853, but they weren't actually, it wasn't actually discovered they were part of a meteorite until 1860. So in 1853, the first meteorite was discovered, and William Mackay had some of the meteorite made into a horseshoe, which he exhibited at the Melbourne exhibition in 1854. And he described it as made from a specimen of iron from Western Port. So, and this iron turned out to come from the number one, which is this one here, the number one meteorite. So it was Alexander Cameron who was the first person to bring the public's attention to these Cranbourne meteorites, because in 1860 he took the horseshoe to Melbourne to a conference to convince the powers to be that Cranbourne needed a railway station due to the commercial possibilities of all this iron in the area. So as it turned out, the specimen of iron was then taken to the scientists, who decided that it was actually part of a meteorite and it wasn't a lot of iron deposits. So we didn't become like the Hamersley Rangers and the start of, you know, the fortune of someone like the who had the big iron deposits, what's her name, Gina Reinhardt. That didn't happen like that at all. But it got a lot of attention, these meteorites, and apparently even the British Museum, who took the first meteorite, they took that back to England, and apparently the Emperor of Austria was also fascinated by our meteorites. So it was an interesting thing. So it was 1860 that the meteorites first put Cranbourne on the map, and Cranbourne actually had to wait another 28 years for a railway line, but never mind. So that is it. The last meteorite was found in 2008 at Clyde, and it weighs 85 kilos. Like they range in size from something like 3 tonnes to this 23 kilos. There used to be one at the Civic Centre, on display at the Civic Centre at Narre Warren, but it's been put away now since they've moved to Bunjil Place, so that will no doubt be, anyway, there's so much to do with that. And the last one that was found was 2008, and that is on display at the Casey Ray swimming pool just near the Cranbourne Library. So Cranbourne meteorites, you may also remember there used to be a display of, fake meteorites in the corner of High Street and...
were they fake?
Yeah, they're fake, yeah. They weren't the real ones. I know, you might have been disappointed to think they were the right ones, but they were just fake ones. But they had a display there. Yeah, clearly you remember them well, but they were fake, yeah. Anyway. So Cranbourne meteorites, put Cranbourne on the map, as I said. So the land sales took place in the 1850s, and after that, the three sorts of buildings that always get built first in an area are schools, churches, and hotels. And Cranbourne was no different. So the first school that opened in Cranbourne was 1856. And it opened opposite the racecourse where the senior citizens are now, on the South Gippy Highway. And it was just a small, looks like a 2-room school. And that was the first school that opened. And it moved, there it is there, 1890. I love this photo. I show this when I do talks to schools, because all these little girls in little white pinnies are just so nice. Imagine girls having to wear white aprons to schools these days. It's just amazing. But that's a lovely photo. It must just be... Yeah. And then the school moved in 1969, I think it was, to its present location in Bakewell Street. But that was the first building that opened. So the school was an early building, and churches were an early building. And the first church in Cranbourne was the Presbyterian Church, established by the Reverend Alexander Duff. So Alexander Duff was he had been appointed Deputy Registrar of Births and Deaths for the Cranbourne Road, for the Cranbourne area. So if you had an ancestor born in Cranbourne in the 1850s and 60s, you'd see Alexander Duff would have been the registrar. He was born in Northern Ireland, came to Australia in mid-1850s and took up the role of the Presbyterian Church, and which also covered the role at Dandenong, and that he also covered Berwick and Cranbourne, and he had services as far south as the Bass River, which he visited on his horse Dobbin, apparently. So he had held the first Presbyterian services in Cranbourne were held at Alexander Cameron's house, and then the Presbyterian Church was built in 1860. It was demolished, I've got 1949 here. It was demolished around then about 1950. It seems a shame that it went, but anyway, it did go. So that's the Presbyterian Church, established by the Reverend Alexander Duff. So Alexander Duff was also he held evening classes for young men and women on arithmetic, physics, mathematics, English, Latin, Greek, French and German. So he was obviously very interested in intellectual pursuits. I'm sure the young lads and ladies of Cranbourne appreciated this. And he was also quite a physical man. He was interested himself in blacksmith and blacksmith work. And he also held in 1858, the Mornington Farmers Society held their farming competitions on his farm. His farm was actually located where the Cranbourne Primary School is now located. So you can't sort of imagine this now, having a farming competition on anywhere in Cranbourne, but it was held there at his farm. So there's lots of Duffs in the area, and they're all connected to the Reverend Alexander Duff. So we had the Presbyterian Church built, and the Catholic Church was built just a year after 1861. And this was, you may, on the corner near the Cranbourne Public Hall. So it was replaced in 1929 by this brick building that you see here on the right, which you may recognise now. It was Heavenly Pancakes. It's now a restaurant. But it was Taco Bill's, I think, then Heavenly Pancakes for a while. So it's nice to see the church. The building is still actually in use, and not as a church, of course, because the new St Agatha was built further down Sladen Street. But that was the opening of the new building in 1929. And the last church was the Anglican Church, which was built in 1865, which is still here. I think that this Anglican Church is the oldest building still left in Cranbourne. There's not very many old buildings left in Cranbourne, so we're still lucky to have this building. It's been extended, of course, but it's still there. So, as I said, schools, churches, and hotels were, of course, the other sort of types of building that were always built in the town first. Usually the hotels were built first. This is the Mornington Hotel, which was established in around 1860 by Thomas and Eliza Gooch. Now, it's on the same site as Kelly's Hotel, which we'll look at more photos of in a minute. So it was, sorry, going this way. This is Mr. and Mrs Gooch. I love this story. So Thomas Gooch was he was an American, and he was a sailor on the Sacramento. Mrs Gooch, she was Miss Minister then, she was a passenger on the Sacramento. So they sailed out from England, wherever they came from, and then the Sacramento was wrecked at Port Phillip Heads. So, he'd met Elizabeth on board the ship. They lost everything in the shipwreck, but they found true love, and they married in 1854 and moved to Cranbourne later on and established their hotel. So Elizabeth herself, who looks like a very tough woman who wouldn't take any rubbish from anyone in the hotel, she gave birth to 8 children between 1855 and 1867. So she was 11 children, 8 children in 11 years. So good on her. So she was, they're an amazing sort of couple, and they had the hotel. And then later on, it was taken over by the Kelly family, and it was demolished in maybe the 1920s, because this hotel was built in 1928. So you'd all know Kelly's Hotel. If you've been to Cranbourne at all, you know Kelly's Hotel. And this is the other hotel that was built in Cranbourne, which was the Cranbourne Hotel, which is on the other side of the street where Greg Clydesdale Square is now, where the Centro Shopping Centre is. And that was built in the 1860s by Robert and Margaret Duff. So Robert Duff was Alexander Duff, the minister's brother. And, it's interesting that, traditionally we see hotel keepers as being Irish and Catholic, but there was quite a tradition in this area of having Protestant hotel keepers, including Sarah Fagan, who I mentioned before, Niall Gunston's great-grandmother, who had the hotel at Lyndhurst, and Janet Bowman, who had the Gippsland Hotel at Beaconsfield, the one on the Cardinia Creek. But by the 1880s, there was a movement towards abstinence from alcohol, or the temperance movement, which of course was taken up by the Protestant churches. And Niall Gunston writes that the Gooches, the Tuckers and the Duffs and Mrs Bowman of the Gippsland Hotel were perhaps the last of their kind to combine evangelical piety with the publican's profession. So it's an interesting lot. So this hotel was demolished in around the 1970s, I believe. Oh, next one. So there's a great description. There's a great description of Cranbourne in 1866, which I'll read to you. So in 1866, James Watson, he took a trip down to Quail Island and he went through Cranbourne. And he said in March 1866, Cranbourne consisted of the hotel, a long, low, weatherboard house, the host being named Duff, the central point of the district. The next was the store, where anything that was wanted could be purchased. Then there was the Presbyterian Church, the minister of which was the brother of the landlord of the hotel. 2 or 3 small cottages and the ruins of another with a big stone bush chimney still standing completed the town of Cranbourne. The ruined cottage is mentioned because in it lived, or rather existed, the local doctor, a clever man, but one who had the habit that many an otherwise good man had fallen victim to. The minister kept his books and instruments, and for special cases, he was sobered up for a couple of days, and the hotel being tabooed to him till he had completed the case in hand. So there you go. So it's a wonder anyone ever survived anything in the olden days of fairly ordinary medical attention, and most doctors who seem to be a little bit drunk most of the time. But that was Cranbourne in 1866. At the time, the population was, let me just look back through my notes. About 115 people lived in Cranbourne in 1860. So just a small town. So one of the things that were established in the 1860s was, of course, the Cranbourne Turf Club, which is still going today. It's amazing. The Pakenham Race Club was also established around this time, 1860s, 1870s, and it's amazing that they still exist today. They're both going strong. But the big thing that hit Cranbourne in the 1870s was, of course, the Shire Offices were built. So the Cranbourne Roads Board had been established in 1860, and this became the Cranbourne Council in 1868. And they built their Shire Offices in 1875, which consisted of the post office at one end and then the Shire Offices at the other end. We're very lucky they still survived. There were talks in the 1960s of pulling them down, but the Cranbourne Shire Historical Society had a campaign to save them. So, along with the Anglican Church, this is like the second oldest building in Cranbourne. And there's another photo. Here. I'm just thinking, I'll put this photo in because council elections are coming up. So in 1909, this was the Cranbourne Shire Council. So in 1909, it appeared that you could vote for anyone as long as it was a bloke with a moustache. So nowadays, of course, we have a bit more choice, but this was the entire council. This here is Mr. Facey, who was the Shire engineer or Shire secretary. So that was the entire Cranbourne Council in 1909 as the officials. And just 2 more photos of the post office building, because I like it. This is my favourite photo, taken in 1969 from the house opposite. It's just such a lovely photo. And that's the War Memorial we'll talk about later, so which is now up in Greg Clydesdale Square. So in the 1880s, Cranbourne started to consolidate as a town. We had the cricket club was established in 1881. The football club was established and things like that. So, but the main impetus to the development of Cranbourne would have been the Cranbourne Railway Station, which opened October 1888. And this is part of the railway line that went from Dandenong right down to Port Albert, Yarram down there, and it opened in stages. So it went through from Cranbourne. Coorup opened 1891, but it would have been a red letter day for Cranbourne when it opened in 1888. And I have a lot of photos of railway stations, but there's a railway dog here. I've got a photo of the Beaconsfield Railway Station with the dog and a photo of the Berwick Railway Station with the dog. Another thing of interest here, of course, are the milk cartons, which the milk cans, which if you're very old like me, you'd remember them even from my youth. So just out there sitting in the sun all day. So the farmers that have bought the milk in the morning, they sat in the sun all day and taken to Melbourne in the afternoon probably. No wonder. Anyway, so that's the Cranbourne Railway Station. I've got 2 more photos of it. This is a great photo from the 1950s. This is the South Gippsland Highway railway crossing, the railway station here on the left. And you can see, was 1950, it's 60 years ago, just how much 70 years ago. There's how much Cranbourne has changed in the past 70 years. If you can envisage this scene today with the Cranbourne railway station here, how different it looks. And even this photograph here that's coming up of Cranbourne railway station in the 1970s, which is only 50 years ago, just how different it is now. So the train stopped running the trains to Cranbourne stopped beyond Dandenong, stopped in the, I think it was the 1980s, and they came, and so they were only introduced again about 30 years ago. Excuse me. So that's a lovely photo of Cranbourne. Excuse me, sorry, cough, cough, cough. Did you say something, Arlene?
No.
No, right. The other thing that Cranbourne had established in the late 1889 was the Cranbourne Market. So there'd been a bit of a issue with this because there's been a lot of discussion from 1883 about where the Cranbourne stock market should go. So, and it was Alexander Cameron's son, also called Alexander, who was on the council at the time. He was quite argumentative, apparently. And so there's arguments from 1883 to 1889, so 6 full years as to where the stock market should go. And in the end, it was decided to put it behind the Shire Offices. And it was there till about the 1930s when it couldn't really compete with Dandenong sale yards, so it closed down then. But that's a reminder how Cranbourne was once a country town and relied on, you know, cattle sales and sheep sales. Yeah. And through the 90s, there was a tennis club. I love this photo. The tennis club was established. This is all the ladies playing tennis. I could just imagine playing tennis in that gear today. And a brass band was established as well in 1899. So by 1899, Cranbourne itself had a population of 200 people. It was a growing town, but the actual Shire had also grown a lot. So in 1890, the Shire of Cranbourne population was 1,650. By 1910, it was 3,900, so nearly 4,000 people. And that increase, more than double in those 20 years, could most likely be accounted for by the development and the drain of the Kurup Swamp, which we talked about last week. So the Kurup Swamp opened up acres and acres of land, and the towns of Delmore, Caninia, Bales, Kurup, Kitani, Yanathan were all in the Shire of Cranbourne. So as the swamp developed, more people moved there, and that increased the population of the Shire of Cranbourne. So and the actual township population from 1890 to 1910 went from 130 people to 200 people, but enough to have a brass band and a tennis club. Oh, that's a nice photo. This is Cranbourne in 1900. Yeah, just a small country town. And this is an interesting story about Cranbourne. So in 1911, George Hope's model dairy moved to Cranbourne from Kooyong Road in Caulfield. He established the dairy then, moved to Cranbourne, and he supplied milk to the Lady Talbot Milk Institute. So it's quite a, he produced something like 1,800 litres a day, and the Lady Talbot Milk Institute was established to help reduce the infant mortality rate at the time. So the milk was, I'll tell you the story. So the dairy produced 1,800 litres a day for the Lady Talbot Milk Institute, which then distributed this special milk to around 1,600 babies. The milk was regularly checked by laboratories at the University of Melbourne for contamination. The cows were checked to ensure they were free from tuberculosis, and the farm employees were also checked to make sure it was pure and safe, that they also had medical checks. And these checks were done to ensure the milk was pure and safe for babies. Early in the 1900s, there was concern about the high infant mortality rate, and various schemes were introduced to improve the life of mothers and babies. Lillis Skeen, who was a welfare worker and women's activist, suggested that the establishment of a safe milk supply, which would help contribute to the health of these little babies, and it was established as the Lady Talbot Milk Institute. So Lady Talbot was the wife of the Governor of Victoria. Mrs Steen also fought for the establishment of infant welfare centres. The role of the Lady Talbot Milk Institute was to supply pure bottled milk to infants to reduce the deaths caused by unsanitary milk. They supplied the milk in an ice chest to deserving cases, and families had to apply through the infant welfare centres, the local council, or be recommended by their doctor. And the milk was subsidised by a combination of the local council, the state government, and institute funds. So you may come across these milk bottles, and it was raw milk. It was not pasteurised. George Hope said that he didn't pasteurise the milk. He just had, it was his absolute sticking to clean routines and checking of the health of the workers and the health of the cattle that led to the pure milk. So it is an interesting story. He had the land Mayfield, which was Alexander Cameron's land, and that was his farm. And he produced the milk for Lady Talbot until about 1938. So it's an interesting part of Cranbourne's history. Now, in 1919, Mr Poole established his garage. This was Lawson Poole, and he opened the garage in 1919. Lawson Poole was the grandson of early settlers. So Lawson Poole's grandfather, Frederick, and his brothers, George and Thomas, had arrived in Cranbourne in the 1860s. George had the Sherwood Hotel, which was on the corner of Turrentire Road and the South Gippy Highway. And Frederick, Mr Poole's grandfather, he was on the Cranbourne Road Board and Cranbourne Shire Councillor, etc. So Frederick Poole had a son, William Burdett Poole. William Poole married Mary Einstedel, another local name, and it was William and Mary who had Lawson Poole, who started this garage. He, in 1932, Lawson Poole married Laura Mary Poole, Laura Mary Brunt. She actually was also from a very early Cranbourne family. Laura Brunt's father, William Brunt, and her mother had the Spring Villa, which is where the Settlement Hotel is now located, and they were quite early, early settlers. So her father's cousin Ralph came to officer, and Brunt rode in officer. He's named after her father's cousin. And William was a Shire councillor as well for 20 years. So the Pooles had no children, but they were very much involved with the community, and so Lawson Poole was a Justice of the Peace, a life governor at the Dandenong Hospital, the Hastings Hospital, and the Western Port Hospital at Coorierup. There was a ward named after him at the Berwick Hospital, a ward named after him at the Dandenong Hospital. They were very generous with their time and their money, and they also supported things like the churches, the Girl Guides, and Lawson Poole was involved with the Masonic Lodge. He was also a member of the Turf Club, and there was a Lawson Poole stand that was named in honour of him. They both died in the 1980s and are buried at Cranbourne Cemetery. So you can't really look at the 20th century history of Cranbourne without really looking at the history of Lawson Poole and Laura Poole and all they did to contribute to the society. But I have to say, that's one of my favourite photos. That's their house here, where they live next to it. So this is on the corner of South Gippy Highway and Sladen Street, right opposite the Shire Offices. And it was this porch here that the photograph I showed you before was taken from, of the Shire Offices, in a 1969 photo. They're all gone now, sadly. This is High Street 1920s. It's actually really, I say that, it's not High Street. It's actually Sladen Street. Now, another big thing that happened in Cranbourne was the Melbourne Hunt Club, which arrived 1925. There's various dates for its arrival, but I think 1925 is actually the correct date. My predecessor, Claire, has written about the Hunt Club, and as she says, fox hunting relies on the availability of space and the cooperation with neighbouring farms. Land was the key to the survival of the Melbourne Hunt Club. They were in Oakley, but by the 1920s, Oakley's farms were beginning to disappear, signalling a problem for the club. The Cranbourne site on the corner of Thompson's and Narry Warren Road was chosen by a special country committee of the Melbourne Hunt Club in the late 1920s. and they had permission was required from landowners to hunt across their property, and the committee had to work very hard to achieve and maintain this. There was eventually a network of properties that would participate in the hunt, making their land available and allowing the club to install special points in their fences where horses could safely jump. So it was an interesting part of Cranbourne's history. And you talk to people, or you hear people, you put photos up, and they say, you know, so not only were, so it was only, so the hunt club was interesting because, you know, hunting is mainly like a rich person's sport, you would consider. But then at Cranbourne, the locals often mixed with them as well. Anyone who loved horses were often involved in the hunt club. And then there's lots of functions carried out at the hunt club headquarters. And there was like, you know, dances and 21st and pony club events and things like that. So in the early days, lots of people who had an involvement with Cranbourne also had an involvement with the hunt club, even though they weren't particularly rich or anything like that. So it did play a large role in the social life of the community of Cranbourne. It was, it lasted until 1996 when it was taken over. It's now the Hunt Club Housing Estate. So this is an aerial photo we have from 1980. So you can actually see the Hunt Club here. So this is Cameron Street. This side here is where the library is today. The library and Casey Ray swimming pool and the indoor sports centre. And so that is the continuation of Sladen Street, Cranbourne Road. And that's the railway line here. And that's, as I said, Cameron Street. It's a great photo. 1980s, only 40 years ago, well, only 40 years ago, which doesn't seem that long to me, but it's amazing how much Cranbourne has changed since then. So that was the Hunt Club. The Hunt Club, they kept all those little dogs. They had kennels at the Hunt Club. I just found this out a few years ago. They had kennels at the Hunt Club and all those little hounds were kept there. So you can understand now, of course, as Cranbourne, like Oakley in the 20s, Cranbourne in the 90s, as it became increasingly urbanised, it became harder for people to find enough farms for the Hunt Club to actually go across. So they did move to Pakenham. I'm not really sure where they are now. So I just love this photo, Cranbourne Netball Team 1926. It's sort of interesting where a whole mixture of, I think it was the premiers, and I just sort of love the photo of what sport was like in the old days before all the fancy uniforms and things like that. Whereas, you know, a whole mixture of young girls playing. It was actually the Cranbourne State School team. Just such a lovely photo. 1928, I put this slide in for when I do my talks to schools. Electricity came to Cranbourne. Could you say to kids, oh, you know, what it was like without electricity? And they sort of think, well, oh, no Xbox, no PlayStations, no mobile phones. But of course, they don't realise, of course, that, you know, when we grew up in the 60s or 50s, whenever we grew up, that, you know, we had none of that either, of course. But it is interesting, you know, it was only 28 the electricity came to Cranbourne. 1939, the War Memorial was unveiled. There'd been a lot of, so the War Memorial, ironically, was unveiled 1 month before World War II started. This was the first War Memorial. And there's been like discussion for like 20 years as to what form memorial it should take. So should it be a memorial hall? Should it be this? Should it be that? They'd already had the Avenue of Honour that had been put in the 20s, I think. But the War Memorial was finally unveiled in 1939. It was in front of the Shire Offices, which you can see here from this photo here, and it was later moved. It was originally around this side, and then it was moved, I think it was to the 1950s, and it was moved to here, and it was later moved to Greg Clydesdale Square, where it is today. Another sporting activity in Cranbourne is golf. So the Cranbourne Golf Club is sort of interesting because it was established in 1854 by Jewish people, because apparently in the early days, Jewish people were barred from golf clubs, so they weren't allowed to join as members for some reason. Obviously, anti-Semitism was the reason. So in the 1950s, a group of Jewish businessmen began looking for a site for a golf club for Jewish, so Jewish people could join. And they chose Cranbourne. It had to be in the Sandbelt area, so which is Cranbourne to Frankston. So they chose Cranbourne, and it was established in 1954. I thought I had an aerial of it, but it was in the end they decided whether it would be a Jewish golf club or a golf club for Jews, and they decided in the end it would be a Jewish golf club, but it was for everyone, so anyone could join. But it's an interesting to think that, well, A, that you'd be barred from playing golf because of your religion, but secondly, you know, it's interesting. I had an aerial of this, but I haven't got that now, of just how much the area's changed. So this is what it used to look like before it was developed into the golf club. So. Yeah, so I don't know how to go backwards or frontwards. This is just an early shot of Cranbourne on the corner of, this house was on the corner of High Street and Sladen Street. Just how much we've changed since then. So around the time this is photographed, Cranbourne's population was about 1950 was 500 people. And this is another great photo, 1954. So that's Lawson Poole's garage. That's looking up High Street towards Narre Warren. Back in Cranbourne as well, and truly a country town. Oh, and now we get to my favourite photos. so this is actually, before I go to these photos, between 1952 and 1955. In National Harvest, Heinz and General Motors were all opened in Dandenong. Those big three factories that were the reason that Doveton, for instance, was established, and it increased the population in all areas like Doveton, Narre Warren, and Cranbourne North by, you know, it just increased the population by a lot because people came to the area to work at those three factories. Between them all, they must have employed something like close to 10,000 people, plus all the auxiliary industries that went up, the group around them. So they were. Even though they were Dandenong, they were a big impetus to the development of Cranbourne, and the population increased. Well, the population increased from 500 in 1950 to 800 in 1960, which doesn't seem a lot, but there's 300 people in that time, given it was still a small country town. But these photos were taken in the 1960s, sorry, 1890s. I love this photo. It's one of my favourite photos. I put it up quite frequently on Casey-Gardenia Heritage because it's just such a wonderful photo. It's got a dog and a Holden car and a quiet country street. It's just like the quintessential Australian photo in my mind, the dog and the Holden car. So that's Cranbourne in the 1860s. Oh, sorry, 1960s. Oh, lucky this has been recorded, so you hear all my mistakes. And that's another building somewhere up the Turf Cigarettes, sold Turf Cigarettes. That was a barber's shop. And this one here, another view of High Street, Cranbourne. Yeah, I just love it. So 1970, the Royal Botanic Gardens at Cranbourne was established, and they were established in it used to be the old sand mine. And we are extraordinarily lucky that this is 50 years ago, they had the foresight to preserve this land. I mean, it's a wonderful, it's just a wonderful attribute that Cranbourne has, the Royal Gardens. And also the Australian Garden was opened a bit later. But we're just so lucky we've got all this remnant bushland that's still preserved. It's just an amazing thing. Yeah. Oh, yes. And because I'm a librarian, I have to tell you about the library service. So that's the original library service. Actually, I'll tell a lie. There was actually a library in the original Shire Offices that started in the 1900s or so. But the Cranbourne, let me find my notes here, ruffle through here. The first, 1976 was when the first mobile library bookmobile, the Cranbourne Shire mobile library bookmobile started. It looked like this one, an old bus. And then that's the timetable. So Cranbourne, Cranbourne High Street. So 11:30 to 12:15 on a Tuesday, then 1:30 to 5 o'clock on a Tuesday. So, oh, there we go, 6 till 8:30 on a Tuesday as well, on a Friday as well. So that's a timetable in the 1978 of the mobile. There's a new aesthetic library opened in, aesthetic as we call it, opened in Cranbourne in 1978, and the current library, which is this one here, but it has been repainted from purple. I don't have a new photo. I should get a new photo. We opened in 1996, so still going strong. Yeah. And eventually we'll be reopened to the public properly. So, I love this. So this here is an aerial photo of Cranbourne in 1996. And what it shows is, that's the Hunt Club here. That's Cameron Street. That's the racecourse down here. That's the main shopping centre. And this here is the Sperry New Holland factory, which became the Cranbourne Library. So Sperry New Holland opened in 1980 and built these sorts of machines, made right here in Cranbourne. They were. They'd commenced in Dandenong. They moved out to Cranbourne in 1980 and purchased 46 hectares in Cranbourne, open land, and built a 2-hectare factory. There was initially 400 people employed, and then eventually it closed down. But it also had, as you can, had a that's a railway line, had a spur line in from the railway line as well. So in 1994, after it closed, the Cranbourne Shire decided to buy the property for $5 million, which apparently was quite a lot of money at the time. And then they purchased it, and then eventually the administration building was turned to the Cranbourne Library, and the back section is now the indoor sports section. And this shed here, which is the dispatch room, was turned into the skate park, and the shed, the skate park, and it's now a performing arts centre as well. So it's been, you'd have to thank Terry Vickerman, whose name is on the Indoor Sports Centre, for actually preserving that for the future, because it is a great facility for the Cranbourne community. Oh, going backwards again. Now, this is Cranbourne Park Shopping Centre, opened in 1978. Very small shopping centre then. And then this is just another view of it here. And this is what it looks like today. So it's really growing. Oh, let me just go back to my notes. And we'll go, this is Casey Fields, opened 2006. It was out in the middle of nowhere. When I first started working at the Cranbourne Library, which was, I don't know, whatever, nearly 20 years ago, I used to travel all the way up from, I come from Coralling, or Bellardo Road, turn to Clyde Road, turn into Sladen Street, and there was not a house anywhere. And you know, of course, how developed the area is now. But once again, we have to thank the council for buying Casey Fields when they did, because that was, it was in the middle of nowhere when it was built, and it was, it's an amazing facility now. And the Casey Ray swimming pool as well is another great facility for the local people. Opened 2009. So here's the Cranbourne population. So you can see this here between 1965 and 1985, the population of Cranbourne went from 1,300 to 1,450, and that is, that's partly the urbanisation, the suburbanisation caused by the fact that people moved here to work at Heinz, General Motors, and International Harvester, as I said, and partly just because of the need for land, and people were moving out, out along the railway lines. But you can see also from 2011 to 2019 how the population is nearly doubled. And this is an old population figure, it probably has doubled by now. And if you just think of the massive development between Cranbourne and Narre Warren, and Cranbourne and Frankston, it's just amazing just how much the area has developed. And it's, Cranbourne's gone from being that small country town to just another suburb now. It's, So just a few aerial shots. This is Cranbourne 1964. That is a racecourse, as you can see. The library is just out here, and that's High Street, Cranbourne. So still mainly to this area here, to the west of the highway, we're still basically undeveloped. This is where the below here is all the sand pits, where the Wilson Botanic Park is now. My husband's father, they moved to a farm on Lyle Street, which is this one here, I think, in the 1940s. They had a poultry farm on Lyle Street in the 1940s. No, they married. Yeah, 1940s, late 1940s. You can't imagine a poultry farm in Lyle Street now, but they only had about less than an acre, and it was enough at the time and isolated enough at the time that you could be living in Lyle Street in Cranbourne and have a poultry farm. So, and then John says his mother, he remembers walking to the Cranbourne station, which is up here, just across open paddocks, and you can see why that would be. There's absolutely nothing there. So Cranbourne has certainly changed a lot. So that's the Cranbourne 1964, and this next aerial is 1980. And even in that short time, that's for 16 years, you can see how much development there's been. So once again, that's a race course. And all these houses here have been developed in that time. And the library's still out here. Oh, and that's my last slide. So, any questions? Thank you for listening. So that's a very quick look at Cranbourne's history from the squatting days right through to what it is today. Really just an outpost of Melbourne, a suburban outpost.